Hello, everyone. I'm back sitting down with Thomas Curran of Thomas H. Curran Associates to talk about the current state of healthcare bankruptcy in the US. So, we definitely have had some conversations before, including our most recent one about insolvency litigation and the expansion to Texas and beyond. So, check that if you haven't listened to that yet. But if people don't know you yet, do you want to introduce yourself, Tom, and talk about your qualifications?
Sure. Uh, Thank you for having me again this morning. My name is Tom Curran. I'm the managing partner of THCA, Thomas H. Curran Associates. We're a boutique um, commercial litigation and insolvency litigation firm based primarily in the U.S., although we have offices in London. Um, we uh, we practice insolvency litigation throughout the U.S. From our offices in the Northeast, in Boston and New York, and from our offices in the Southeast in Austin, Texas, Southwest rather, in Austin, Texas. So we're continuously involved in all uh, various forms of insolvency and insolvency litigation.
Okay. What does boutique mean when you say boutique anyway? I've been wondering that.
Well, we're a small firm by most standards, the 10 lawyers and then support staff. We are specialized in our what we do, and so uh, in our business, in insolvency litigation, commercial business litigation, high stakes bet the company litigation, and cross-border litigation. Um, being efficient and tactical is critical, and so we're we're probably more akin to you know, for a military analogy, we're more akin to special forces and not regular army.
Okay, fair enough. Specialized, bespoke, as the Brits would say.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So, for those listening, who should be listening, who would benefit from this conversation?
I think really any business entity, executive, private equity, governmental agencies that come in contact with a a commercial insolvency in the U.S. Uh, uh, a bankruptcy in the U.S. changes the rules for businesses, both creditors of the company that's attempting to, or the healthcare organization that's attempting to restructure itself. Um, Also, any type of entities or that have contractual agreements with one of the entities that file for restructuring under our bankruptcy code in the U.S. The rules all change when an entity goes into bankruptcy. So anybody who's facing that prospect of dealing with their contractual agreements with this third party that just filed for Chapter 11 restructuring should be aware of the dynamics of a Chapter 11 restructuring.
Okay. And what has changed in the US? Like, why is this such a bigger deal now, on bigger cases, everything with healthcare bankruptcy?
It I think it's a big deal because steadily from 2010 to 2000, I'm going to say 21 or so, um, healthcare bankruptcies were on, a fairly moderate but steady incline, uh, much the same as other industries and sectors of our economy. Um, And but in 2023, starting in 2000, late 2022, 2023, and 2024, bankruptcy, insolvency of healthcare organizations in general and hospitals specific, and groups of hospitals skyrocketed. And so we saw an enormous amount of bankruptcy filings and mega bankruptcy filings for these groups, these hospital groups, healthcare groups that have rolled up into hundreds of hospitals across the country in under one group. And when a group like that with more than $1 billion worth of assets and 10 or $20 billion worth of liabilities files for a restructuring, it's significant. And what's happening in 2025 is that things seem to be slowing down a little bit in terms of the filings, but we've seen some larger mega filings with the Steward Healthcare filing, Prospect Holdings filing. These are large, very large hospital groups that have filed for restructuring, and the common denominator there is that these restructured hospital groups were owned and managed recently by private equity. So that's brought a different dynamic to the insolvencies.
In what way?
Well, it certainly it has changed the dynamic in terms of how many companies are filing and how they file, what issues are created. It's essentially lack of liquidity, assets being sold off to meet the requirements of, the profit requirements of the private equity. That's one side would say that, and that these healthcare companies are essentially have been starved, and that's why they're filing. It has a whole political component to it, as you can imagine, that those that favor private equity and healthcare have one view of what is necessary for the industry and the sector to survive long term with our regulatory framework. And then you have the other side that says, no, private equity has no place in our healthcare system. But it is one thing is clear is that the healthcare system in the U.S. is tied directly to the health insurance system, and the reforms that have come about over the past 20 years. People talk about healthcare reform and healthcare legislation. It's really health insurance reform and health insurance regulation. That's the money that the industry has to work with, and we see that in these restructurings. The most recent mega restructurings, it's resulting in some hospitals and organizations, tertiary care facilities being shut down as part of the restructuring process, the worst performers, if you will. But it's also resulting in these groups and hospitals, the surviving hospitals being sold to new owners and getting new life, new investment, new equity, new management. So it's it's a positive from that perspective, but it's very difficult, obviously, on those that the those that are provided services. Those are the customers.
Yeah,
And
the communities that don't have access to more than just maybe emergency healthcare or treatments and things if hospitals shut down in typically rural communities. And I guess also these have a huge patient base, but they also have a huge staff base. So these
yes,
are incredibly complex cases.
yes, and that's and that ties into the cause that we're seeing in many of these healthcare bankruptcies. Uh, One of the driving causes that are talked about is increased labor costs, increased professional costs. You have, with inflation, you have a dramatic increase in the cost of providing care by these professionals, and that reflects in increased expenses where you don't have a corresponding increase in your revenues. And particularly after COVID, when there was a significant pressure to hire nursing staff, professional staff, um, and and so that market was really stretched and stressed, and you had, kind of an influx of more um, nurse practitioners and high-level nursing professionals doing more for patients. Of course, that comes with a much increased cost and increased charges. And that created um, a revenue friction for many of these facilities that are trying to now restructure out of this. Interesting component of this, however, is that, and people should think about, is that uh, the restructuring system in the U.S., the bankruptcy Chapter 11 system, it is designed for commercial businesses to restructure and stabilize themselves and bring themselves back to profitability in a changed form, if you will, when they come out of this Chapter 11. We see it in all the big bankruptcies. Sometimes it's selling off some of the assets, sometimes it's diversifying, sometimes it's bringing in new needed fresh capital, whatever restructuring is needed. We have a sector, the healthcare sector, that is very different from a commercial enterprise. So you're using tools in a Chapter 11 proceeding to try to restructure. Those tools are meant for commercial enterprises, and the healthcare system is not a commercial enterprise.
Shouldn't be, yeah, definitely not. So where does your work fall in? Who do you typically represent in these situations? Because these are not as regulatory
Yeah.
black and white in any way.
Really, there's three main components of that most of the uh, people, companies, agencies, organizations come into contact with in these big bankruptcies, and they're number one, creditors. Um, there's always creditors. Creditors have a unique position in, they're one of the stakeholders in one of these Chapter 11 restructurings, and the rules are very different from your traditional commerce business rules. And so what you can and cannot do is limited. What you can, how you maximize your recovery as a creditor is limited, um, and so that that is an important piece. The second piece is, as I alluded to earlier, when you have contractual relationships with the entity, whether you're the landlord, whether you're a a provider, a supplier, whether you're a buyer of services, whatever contractual relationship you have with an organization that goes into restructuring. Well, now you're playing it under different rules, and the rules are not um, they're not well known. So you need somebody to help you guide you through what can be done with your contractual relationship with this entity that's in Chapter 11, what you can do, what you can't do, what restructuring means to you as a third party participant. That's important. And lastly, in these restructurings, I think we've talked about this before, these large restructurings, there's also attempts for trustees in bankruptcy, or um, the debtors in bankruptcy, or some sort of administrators, to try to claw back money that had been paid out just before the bankruptcy, try to claw that money back into the estate and redistribute it to creditors. And so anybody who's done business with the entity in the years leading up to the bankruptcy is susceptible to be um, getting involved in those types of clawback disputes. And so that's that's uh, that's a significant event in the business life of an entity who's just trying to um, deal with, maybe it's a loss of revenue because of the bankruptcy, maybe it's a loss of a source of product, maybe it's a loss of a customer if you're selling product to the entity that goes into bankruptcy. So you're not only having to deal with how your organization deals with that um, eventuality, that disruption, but now you have a trustee or an assignee or some sort of administrator asking you to give back the money that you were paid for your services leading up to the bankruptcy. So those are the kind of three areas where we help um, stakeholders navigate this treacherous, insolvency waters.
Absolutely. And that money was probably already paid to the employees or like the nurses or people that help take in care roles and things. So then to come back and then you have this house of cards of bankruptcy cases. I'm sure that can happen. So you have to be careful with this. I don't think it's going to surprise those people listening that you're not from Texas with your accent, but you happen to be in Texas today.
Yes.
So it feels like an appropriate time to ask about, I think it's called the Steward Healthcare case.
Yes.
And I know I don't know what you can say as you're working on it, but I think it's a good example of what can happen with the complexity of a city. Is a series of hospitals is the complexity of a city.
Yes, sure. And it's a massive bankruptcy in healthcare, um, the healthcare realm. It's over $1 billion worth of assets. It's categorized as a mega bankruptcy. It's in Houston Bankruptcy Court, and you know um, there's been a lot of fallout throughout the country with Steward Healthcare. Now, you have all of um, the interesting factors in the Steward bankruptcy case. You have the pre-bankruptcy kind of management of the conglomerate, we'll call it. It's a healthcare conglomerate. I mean, it has hospitals and care facilities and physicians groups and all types of tertiary medical facilities all over the country. Um, it's not just a Northeast issue. It's not a Texas issue. It's all over the country. So you have this conglomerate that files for bankruptcy, and um, leading up to the bankruptcy, it was owned and managed by Cerberus private equity. So you have that piece where there's the, a lot of the, we'll call it the political talk about, whether private equity in healthcare is appropriate, it's beneficial, and both sides have their good arguments for that. And I stay out of that and
Yeah.
the legal
It is
side.
what it is. You don't
Yes,
have a choice.
sure.
Your
And
opinion doesn't matter when it's the law anyway.
right. And sure, there's been a lot of, there's been, more than a dozen hospitals that have closed um, in the Steward bankruptcy. But overall, the bankruptcy itself is, we're a little over 1 year in, and it's, I think, by and large, despite losing facilities, despite losing services in rural areas where emergency areas, Neshoba Valley, up in the Northeast, really hit hard because they as a result of the bankruptcy, they lost one of their facilities in that provided emergency medical services up in the rural area. Despite all that, um, most of the facilities are being resold to new entities, um, different buyers. So it's essentially being, broken up um, into a lot of smaller uh, healthcare operators that are buying up 3 or 4 different groups down in Pennsylvania and in up in the Northeast. There's another group that's buying up hospitals. So you have kind of this decentralizing of this massive conglomerate. And so there's there's positive to the restructuring. It's the restructuring, I would say, is working. And we can't tell the future, and we don't know if these entities will um, prosper better or operate better as smaller individual groups rather than this conglomerate. But um, Steward Healthcare was not working prior to bankruptcy. So um, that m most of the facilities have found a new home is a positive. And we're only 1 year into the restructuring. And I say it's an cautiously optimistic that that's a success.
Absolutely. And is that a trend you're seeing now, that the opposite is happening to prevent more bankruptcies, to reduce the collective risk?
Um, well, there's there's a lot more talk about more regulations, more oversight. Um, I don't know what effect that will have on uh, the commerce going forward and the groups going forward. I think that if hospital groups going forward believe that their road to survival and expansion and prosperity is, whether they're private equity, whether they're privately owned smaller groups, whether they're nonprofit, whoever the controlling entity is, if they believe that road to prosperity is bigger and more, you know, um, more roll-ups and operating as a community of hospitals across the country rather than individual, then that's where it'll stay. I do think that they'll face extraordinary headwinds in with pressures of their their largest customers, so to speak, is you know Medicare and Medicaid, and you know so with all the changes in that as that goes, the revenue of these organizations go. And that brings us back to that dichotomy that we talked about earlier, is that these are, we expect these hospitals to, um, to make a profit, at the very least, break even, and not get themselves into these enormous fiscal dilemmas where they have to go into bankruptcy with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of debt that they can't pay. But we expect that in an industry that's not a commercial industry. So we'll see if lessons are learned, but we certainly have there's certainly plenty of evidence for the decision makers to look back and say, this is where we got it wrong. From 2010 to 2025, there's 15 years of experience that they can say, this is how, because a lot went wrong for you to have in that time frame, hundreds and hundreds of bankruptcy filings of healthcare organizations.
We can assume more are coming. Something when we talked ahead, you had said were that procedures are there, but the nuances aren't. And I thought that was very profound. But how does that work when we know this is coming, the restructuring of Medicaid and Medicare, and the new restructuring that's going to have like 170,000 people at risk homeless and things like that. So how can these, not medical businesses per se, but kind of prepare or to try not to go bankrupt, because that's not the ideal?
Right.
Or how can these creditors, we obviously don't want them to stop supporting hospitals or supporting healthcare, and we don't want them to stop providing necessary services or supplies or staff, of course. So what advice do you have in this much grayer, nuanced area?
Well, and most importantly, we don't want the flow of capital to diminish, because capital is the lifeblood of these organizations, like any other organization, and they need that capital to provide even better services, more efficient services, and more profitable services, so that they can, pay these increased labor charges within you get what you pay for. If you want good, excellent, um, the world's #1 healthcare system, then you have to pay for it. And so I do think that there's an extraordinary opportunity to try to enhance and kind of think differently, not only looking at the past with the failures of the healthcare system, but think about how AI and technology can help, not just on the research and development side of things, where we kind of break up the pharmaceutical industry, which does amazing work in research and development. We have the I guess the part of healthcare where you're doing, cutting edge techniques and medical equipment to really revolutionize healthcare and for the future. I think that taking that, my advice would be, try to take that same technology, that same innovation, that same capital, and um, focus it on profitability of these hospitals.
Mhm.
And even the nonprofits, the more success you have, the more it'll drive investment capital. And the more investment capital you have, the more success you'll have. So it'll be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, and I think with that comes, you know, necessary guardrails in terms of, you know, stripping down these entities and selling off the parts um, at opportune times. That's turned out to be a failure. And, you know, some would argue that that's been done um, too um, too much for the benefit of shareholder uh, equity and profits. But certainly, I think the industry really needs to um, figure out a better way to attract capital, a better way to attract and use innovation to uh, be successful. Because even though they're not a commercial enterprise, they're operating in a commercial world.
Mhm. But with the advice of the medical industry, because it is always going to be unique. We can,
Yes, yes,
it needs to be a collaboration of both sides. It can't be fully medical based or fully business based. It needs to be in between, and
I
with
think that's
regulatory bodies, everything.
that's an extraordinary point. There's got to be you know, a marriage, if you will, of those two for kind of the greater good of the system as a whole,
Mhm.
because um, you know, that's got to be the goal. And if you can improve the system as a whole, um, then everything else will take care of itself.
Absolutely. If people want to continue this conversation or have questions, it's one of our most complex topics we've discussed on here, and there's no direct answers. But if people want to have a chat with you and talk about their de-risking, etc., how do they get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with us through our website. We're our communication is centralized, so you know, even though we have offices in the Northeast and the Southwest and some overseas, where we can be reached at our website, which is thcalaw.com. Email my name, tcurran@thcalaw.com. And, you know, we have one telephone number for all our global offices, 617-207-8670. So
And
that's how
when
you.
you say global offices and everything, because we are talking in the auspice of an international community, why would the world, like other countries, care when
it-
healthcare system goes bankrupt in the US? Does it affect
oh,
international? Stop by.
absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, every sector of business in the economy that we deal in has now, you know, tentacles all across the world, and cross-border business, cross-border litigation, cross-border insolvency is, you know, the norm now, because invariably, and for instance, on the healthcare front, invariably, um, there is so much uh, interplay between our foreign suppliers, foreign, you know, offshore suppliers, partners. Um, you know, even there's an enormous um, kind of, I would say, migration of professionals in the healthcare industry that is global, really. And so um, in every one of these restructurings, you're going to have um, a fairly significant piece of what we call the stakeholders will be entities, individuals, educational institutions, governmental agencies from across the globe that have a stake in certainly we've seen it in the Steward bankruptcy. We've seen it in a lot of them, the mega bankruptcies, that creditors and stakeholders from all over the world are involved. So that's important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to our listeners. You surely know someone that will find this conversation interesting. So please do share it forward, as well as look for Tom and I chatting elsewhere in this feed. Thank you both. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you again.